The federal government has proposed the Help to Buy scheme, which would allow eligible home buyers to purchase a property sooner. This scheme is similar to previous state government programs such as the Victorian government's Home Buyer Fund and the Western Australian government's Home Share Scheme, which would involve a shared equity arrangement where the government contributes up to 40% of the property value towards purchasing a property in exchange for a proportional interest in it. Today, we're going to go through the eligibility to get in the scheme, when the scheme will become available, how it works, as well as the biggest problem I see with it. If you're considering going for this scheme, you need to make sure you're aware of this massive pitfall. Let's start off with the eligibility criteria for the Help to Buy scheme. Now, the scheme has a number of different requirements, so let's break it down. The first is you need to be an Australian citizen at least 18 years of age. There is an income requirement where your yearly income can't exceed $90,000 for an individual or $120,000 or less for couples. You need to be looking at residential properties and you must live in the property being purchased. From an ownership perspective, you must not currently own any land or property in Australia or overseas. In terms of deposit, you have to have saved up the required minimum, which is 2% of the home price, and are able to finance the remainder of the purchase through a home loan with a participating lender. In terms of costs, you need to be able to cover all associated upfront costs such as stamp duty, legal fees, and bank fees. Effectively, you are responsible for the ongoing associated costs with the property such as rates, strata, and electricity bills. Now, the Help to Buy scheme was introduced by the Australian Labor Party. The shared equity scheme entails the government helping Australians purchase a home by contributing up to 40% of the property price for a new home and up to 30% of an existing one. As we talked about earlier, participants need just 2% of the purchase price, and they also don't need to pay lender's mortgage insurance. They also don't need to pay rent on the proportion of the home that the government owns. They can also buy out the government share when they're able to do so. The scheme is designed to help with the long-standing affordability crisis. There'll only be 10,000 places available to eligible Australians each year. If you find value in these videos, please consider hitting that like button as it really helps the channel, and a big thanks to all our subscribers for your support. Inspires us to keep creating more content, which we hope you enjoy. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all things property and finance. So the big question is, when will this scheme be available? Well, the Help to Buy scheme is set to commence July this year. So we've talked about the eligibility to get in the scheme, when the scheme will become available, and how it works. Now I want to go through some of the fine print as well as the biggest problems we see with the scheme. Starting off on the top with the income category. As we talked about earlier, individuals can't exceed a gross annual income of 90 grand a year. For couples, they must not exceed a gross annual income of $120,000 per year. Now, once you're in this scheme, the biggest pitfall we see is if your income exceeds the maximum allowed for 2 consecutive years, then participants will need to repay the government's financial contribution in part or in full as circumstances permit. For me, this is a huge red flag. You can only think about the fact that if you've got yourself in this scheme and you're aspiring to progress in your career, you get some pay rises, and then all of a sudden you've had 2 consecutive financial years that if you're an individual earning over $90,000, where all of a sudden you're getting kicked out of the scheme and you need to find a way to refinance. If your property value hasn't increased, then you might have to pay for things like lender's mortgage insurance, where this scheme has been specifically designed where you don't need to pay that. I personally think that once you're in this scheme, you should be able to stay into it. And this income assessment is a huge pitfall as part of the scheme, and one that you need to be very aware of. And it's something that I can see causing a lot of issues for those that have been in the scheme that might not be able to refinance in the future. The second pitfall I see with some of the fine print is the property ownership and residency. You must have owned no land or property under your name in Australia or overseas, and the property being purchased must be your primary residency. I was only speaking with a client today who owned an investment property and had been told by their bank that they could still apply for government grants and schemes even if they owned an investment property. Now, this is true in many cases, but with this particular Help to Buy scheme, if you own an investment property, then you wouldn't actually qualify for the scheme. This is also true if you own a property overseas, which would see you disqualified from the scheme. Now, living in the property as your primary residence definitely makes sense. One of the things that you'd also need to be aware of is if you moved out of the property and made it an investment property. In a lot of cases with these schemes, such as a home guarantee scheme, and even with this Help to Buy scheme, you'd find that you would actually need to move out of it and refinance with another lender. Now, we know one of the criteria is that the property needs to be a principal place of residence. It's not really clear, or there isn't much information on the fact that if you made this property an investment property in the future, whether you need to remove yourself and pay out the government's contribution as part of the scheme. If this is the case, this is another potential pitfall to be aware of, because a lot of first homeowners buy their first home as a stepping stone and sometimes try and keep that first home when they're buying their next home, where they might need a bit more space for their family. So once again, could be a massive issue and something that you need to be aware of. Another pitfall is that participants must pay for all legal costs, conveyancing fees, stamp duty, and ongoing related taxes and expenses with the property. This is a common misconception. I've spoken to a lot of first homeowners that are looking at this potential scheme, and in a lot of cases, they feel that if the government owns 30% of the property, why aren't they sharing in the expenses? Unfortunately, that's not the case. You need to pay for all expenses, ongoing and otherwise. The government owns a percentage of the property, so when you pay back, you need to pay back the value of what that property is. Participants can buy a new property or existing property that follows any of the following. It can be a standalone house, a semi-detached house, a duplex, a townhouse, or a unit. And the last requirement as part of the fine print is that you must pass the bank's serviceability assessment and qualify for a home loan. Now, the participants in the Help to Buy don't have to pay rent on the proportion of the home that the government owns. They can also buy out the government's equity at least 5% at a time when they're ready to do so. Now, you might be weighing up whether to go the Help to Buy path or the first home guarantee scheme, and you're not sure of the major differences between the both. The biggest difference is the Help to Buy is a shared equity scheme where the government contributes up to 40% for new builds and up to 30% for existing properties. This means that you'd have a lower loan amount because effectively the government's contribution isn't a loan, it's actually equity that they own in your property. As with the home guarantee scheme, the government is effectively being your guarantor, where you put down a 5% deposit. They guarantee up to 15% of the property value, which once again sees you pay no mortgage insurance. However, effectively you are borrowing 95% of the property value. As such, loan repayments would be calculated on that. The Help to Buy only requires you to have a 2% deposit, where the home guarantee scheme requires you to have a 5% deposit. In terms of availability, the Help to Buy only has 10,000 spots, where the home guarantee actually has 35,000 spots per year. The other difference is the Help to Buy is available to anyone that does not own a property, where the home guarantee scheme is only available to first homeowners. Both schemes require you to be an Australian citizen. There is income caps we talked about earlier with the Help to Buy scheme, where you're limited to a 90 grand income as a single and 120,000 as a couple, where the home guarantee scheme has higher thresholds of $125,000 for a single person and $200,000 for a couple. So if you're looking for assistance with the Help to Buy or even the home guarantee scheme, here at Hunter Galloway, we can help. We're a mortgage broker. There's zero cost for our service, and we help home buyers right across Australia. So if you're looking for a great mortgage broker, we can help. Call us on 1300 088 065 or visit our website huntergalloway.com.au, and we'll see you next time.